Welcome to this web presentation. I am Nondumiso Peñane, a lecturer here at the Faculty of Law at Stellenbosch University. Today, I am going to give you an overview of the respective programs that we have at the faculty. So you may be thinking, I want to do law, but how am I going to get there? Well, I am here to answer these questions for you. We have the BA Law, the BCom Law, the 4-year LLB, and the BAc LLB program. You may wonder, why do we have all these different programs? Well, this is why I want to give you an overview of the various options and what the differences and similarities between them are. You may have already watched the webinars on the individual programs, so I am not going to bore you with all the same information again. Instead, I will summarize how the different programs fit together. First, what you have to remember is that every program has something in common, namely that at the point of graduating, you are going to have an LLB degree. Because no matter what career option you pursue in law, whether you want to become an attorney, an advocate, a magistrate, or a judge, you will need an LLB. And basically, what these respective options will provide you are simply slightly different routes to eventually obtaining your LLB. But whilst there are a few differences between the programs, what they have in common are the core skills that you will be exposed to. Typically, law involves a lot of reading, writing, and logical and critical thinking. You might be wondering which school subjects could help to already develop some of these skills. Well, one should not underestimate your high school subjects. For example, if you have mathematics, you may wonder what mathematics has to do with law. Well, one thing is that you learn logic through mathematics. You know that if you have a math problem, you have to start from point A and you have to end up at point B. And it has to be logical how you get from point A to point B. As a further example, think about what you did in your language subjects or anywhere where you had to write essays. In an essay, you had to have an introduction and a main body to that introduction, and then you had to have a logical conclusion that tied everything together. These things might already be very natural to you, and I assure you that they will serve as good preparation for what you would need as a law student. But still, you may be asking, how do I choose whether I want to do a BA Law or a BCom Law or the 4-year LLB or even the BAc LLB? To answer this question, allow me to use the metaphor, all roads lead to Rome, which you may have heard before. Now, in the olden days, in fact, the very old days, the times of Julius Caesar and so forth, Rome was a center of their universe, and it was said that all roads eventually led to Rome. Of course, it helped that the Romans ordered their roads to be built in such a manner to increase trade and the like, but I hope you get the general idea. The metaphor suggests that there was one eventual destination, but obviously, with people coming and traveling from all corners of the Roman Empire, they had different routes that they could take in their travels. There would be direct routes, or some people could even choose to take the more scenic but slower routes to get to Rome. Some of these were easier and safer to travel, while others were not. Some took much longer, some not. But the point being, eventually, those travelers would end up in Rome. And this is what I want to point out to you in giving this overview of our programs. That no matter what road you take, you will eventually end up with an LLB. So let's take the BA Law and the BCom Law, for example. There, you would do an undergrad in commerce or in the arts where your focus may be on psychology or political science or history or philosophy. because you may think that maybe you want to do something different after completing your law degree. You may want to become a journalist, a diplomat, or a psychologist where legal background will help you. Or if you do a BCom law, you may think maybe after you're done with the BCom law degree, I don't necessarily want to do an LLB, but maybe go into a commercial field instead. If you do your BAc LLB, you have 1 degree. So after 5 years, you can decide whether you become a chartered accountant or whether you become a lawyer. So you are going to end up with an LLB. If you do your BAc LLB, you have 1 degree. So after 5 years, you can decide whether you become a chartered accountant or whether you become a lawyer. So you're going to end up with an LLB, or you want to choose the 4-year LLB. Now, the 4-year LLB really is where you have made up your mind upfront about what you want to become later, and that would be to become a lawyer. Whether it is an advocate or an attorney, or maybe an academic or a legal advisor at some stage, you know that you are committed to law. But this is what I want to highlight in terms of the differences, but also what these programs have in common. Namely that at some stage you will be in different classes in your first year, but the only real difference with these different roads is at what stage of your specific program do you do your law modules. But with that said, you may ask, does the road I choose really matter? Not necessarily. I think you have to be guided by what is interesting to you. This should be your guide. But I would like to point out to you that some of the world's greatest millionaires and billionaires do have some form of legal background. Now, by that, I'm not trying to imply that you must do law just for money. Remember, there are NGOs where people render services to those who are in need and those who are vulnerable, whether it is the right to education or the right to religion or the right to housing or socio-economic rights. Law is not only for making money, although that is a possibility. Remember that it is also there to do good in the world, and ultimately, whichever program you decide to obtain your LLB through, you must be guided by where your interests lie and what your strengths are. And with that, I would like to conclude and thank you for making the time to listen to me today. Thank you, Enkosi Bayadanki.